Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebroe. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. Welcome to Discograffiti, the music obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. I support a wife and a 5-year-old son with Discograffiti as my sole source of income. So if you love the show and this episode, please Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe. That's Gebroe, or at PayPal using my email, which is davidbgebroe@gmail.com. You know what? Better yet, just join Patreon to both tip me and get a ceaseless barrage of must-hear binge listening in return. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Discograffiti's epic new podcast series, The Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True. Along with our special guests, my co-producers on the series, Jeff McEvoy and Dennis Diken. In this episode, we'll fill you in on some of the crucial details of Discograffiti's upcoming series, which I've been teasing for some time now. You'll hear who I plan on interviewing, the ridiculously broad expanse of music that we'll be covering in the series, and what the Behind the Mirror companion episodes on Patreon will consist of, as half of this series will only be accessible there. Coming up, we've got a career-spanning interview with the Beatles' Pete Best, Tom Morello rating the MC5, Robert Schneider rating the Strawberry Alarm Clock, an interview with Thurston Moore, Cassandra Jenkins doing a deep dive on her own discography, and of course, And Your Dreams Come True. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! I am incredibly proud and excited to introduce 2 very good friends of mine. Too excited, in fact, to forestall this with an unnecessarily epic introductory tirade. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Beach Boys and Brian Wilson photographer Jeff McEvoy and Smithereens drummer and all-around mensch Dennis Diken.
Good
Hello there.
morning, David.
Good.
It needs to be noted that this is the second time we're doing the show because we just did almost a complete episode before I realized I was a bonehead who forgot to hit record.
You are a bonehead. We know that.
I know. And I also, before we even get started, I want to just say straight out, I need to explain to everybody listening right now the importance of joining Patreon prior to the launch of And Your Dreams Come True. One of the most important components of this series is going to be the Behind the Mirror companion episodes. The idea with the Beach Boy interviews will be to never interrupt the emotional flow and the rhythm of the interviews with nerdy details about music. So most of that stuff, not all of it, but a great deal of it, is going to be sanctioned off and moved over to Patreon. So these companion episodes aren't augmentative window dressing. They're a tremendously large part of the story. In our Free Friday episodes, the Beach Boys will leave nothing unsaid remaining on the table, but all of the music, meaning the band's records, all the solo work, the side projects, the bootlegs, Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fataar's work in The Flame, David Marks's bands, all of it. That'll be gleefully dissected on Patreon, and that's also where all the non-Beach Boy guests will be too. And there's going to be a hell of a lot of them. My plan is for about 50 of them. So anyway, guys, welcome to the show. I love you both already. You've been worth your weight in gold as companions on this journey. And before you guys start talking, we stand to make nothing from this. The only opportunity that we see is to make sure that nothing remains unspoken before the sun goes down for good.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Is this call over?
I just gave you the best 45 minutes of my life, and I can't remember what I said.
I wanted to make sure it happened to you guys and not Mike Love.
I was going to give you my Venmo information, for crying out loud. No, it's true. We're all just so in love with the Beach Boys and their music, and this is really a thrill to be on board for this.
And I'm also looking forward to just having everything in one place so I don't have to go searching around to look for, what was the Beach Boys' favorite opening band, or what is their favorite song, or what is this? We're going to have everything. It's like a one-stop shop.
Yeah, and I kind of see it as a flame that will always be burning. So, the idea for this thing, I know I've kind of teased it, and there's a bunch of podcasts that have certainly done Beach Boys series. There's one right now called Joker Men, who just this morning put up their Stack of Tracks feature. So obviously they're doing a deep dive if they're doing Stack of Tracks. They did Van Dyke Park Song Cycle. So it's a deep dive. But the idea with this one is, we're going to be doing the music on Patreon, but it's going to be a projected length of 50 episodes, for the Free Friday shows with accompanying episodes, but it's going to feature interviews with as many of the living Beach Boys that we can possibly get together. Currently, Mike Love has confirmed his involvement. Al Jardine has confirmed his involvement. I actually have a 3-hour interview with David Marks. And the overriding goal here is to trace the ultimate emotional history of the group. Then the rating of the actual records will happen on Patreon. The idea for this is that it'll be the most well-researched, definitive Beach Boys interview compilation that's in existence. It'll be topped off with lengthy discussions of every last band and solo release by the group. And I think the three of us wake up every morning now and pinch ourselves that this is not only happening, but it's happening pretty quickly. I mean, half of the guys have committed already.
Pretty phenomenal. Yeah, and I do think there is a sense of urgency to get this rolling and get it out there. And, I just want to say, Dave, and I'm not blowing smoke, but you have a real talent for going places with your interviews that is beyond the boilerplate and the well-trod ground. If anybody's not familiar with what I'm talking about, or only marginally familiar with Discograffiti, I really urge them to listen to your interview with the guys from the association and with Michelle Phillips, because they're such valuable additions to the world of pop music scholarship. I mean, and I know that what you're going to get from the guys and all the other folks that you're interviewing is going to be unique and special and will really be a treasure for the ages. I really mean that. And again, for folks who don't know about, listen to those two multi-episode interviews. They're just incredible.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. And there's other ones like that, like Vashti Bunyan, where it does tremendous deep dive on her story, and we talk about the music at the same time. I think over time, Discograffiti has kind of flipped its card that it is about the music, but really the story of these artists and what they've been through, and the pricelessness of just raw human experience and how they have incorporated that into their psyche and their perspective is just endlessly interesting.
Couldn't agree more. I don't know how you do it, but I think it's because you are so passionate and you care about it that you just connect. You somehow bring out of the folks you're interviewing, you bring out things that I don't think in many cases they've ever divulged before. And I don't mean that it's sensational or anything. It's really a heartfelt exchange. That's where it's at.
Well, I implicate myself. I'm not asking questions. It's a conversation. And I've been through a lot of shit, and I've been through a lot of medical stuff. And so when I offer up personal experience that's usually left, just swept aside in lieu of a Q&A format, when I add in that stuff, it makes the other person vulnerable. So, and I just, I don't mind going there. So, I want to talk briefly, because we're going to be talking in your episodes on Patreon, what it is that you guys do. Why are the two of you involved with this project? What do you guys do that brings even that much more value to an incredibly precious project? Jeff, do you want to kick in here?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, I kind of owe it all to my father. He was in a band in the Army, a folk singing band that won a trip to Hawaii for sounding like the Beach Boys. It was a contest. And as soon as my dad found out, about the Beach Boys and harmony and a little bit more about rock and roll, he kind of swayed toward that side. And always we had music playing constantly at our house, but it was always, Beach Boys #1. So I grew up with all the harmonies, saw my first concert in the mid 70s, and I saw them continuing throughout the years. All the way up through, the Washington, D.C. concert where I ran into a young Jeffrey Foskett backstage. I was an Army photojournalist, and I went to the concert with my friend Carl Spinks. I went backstage with my credentials looking for the Beach Boys. I ran into a guy and said, hey, I'm looking for the Beach Boys. Can you help me out? And there was, Three Dog Night was back there, and America, Hank Williams Jr., the OJs, everybody. There was just a mishmash back there of talent. And he said to me, what do I look like? Some sort of fucking tour guide? And I was like, well, okay, on to the next. And never saw the Beach Boys because they were the last ones to arrive. But when they came on stage, there was the guy that was talking to me like that. And I said to my buddy, I said, hey, that's the guy that said, what do I look like? Some sort of fucking tour guide. And he's up there singing the high parts, the falsetto for the Beach Boys. And Jeffrey was with the Beach Boys for many years. He left in the early 90s, I believe. And I hooked up with him again in the late 90s. In Washington, D.C., we kind of got into a little rapport, and I asked him about, I know you don't remember this experience, but this is what happened. And he said, I'm so sorry, I was an ass. How'd you like to, hang out with Papa Do Run Run, who he was performing with at the time? And thanks to Don Zarelli, I got to go, to this concert and photograph it, which allowed me to send the photographs to Jeffrey and Don. Jeffrey took a look at them, showed them to Melinda Wilson. And next thing you know, I'm getting a phone call saying, hey, how would you like to be Brian's tour photographer for the 2.5 weeks over on the East Coast? And I didn't even hesitate. I didn't even ask my boss or anything. I said, yes, I will. And that started off the history all the way up till today.
You must have been thrilled, man. I can't imagine that moment. You must have replayed it over 1,000,000 times in your head.
Oh, 1,000,001. It's, it's still surreal. Even to this day, when I'm talking to Mike and Bruce or Al, I pinch myself thinking, these are the guys, that if they only knew, and again, I'm not a gushing fan when I'm around them, but if they only knew how much that music influenced me, listening to Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, a beautiful song from Pet Sounds, I still feel a little twinge in my heart from, my first girlfriend or whatever. I'll Bet He's Nice. playing while I'm washing dishes in the kitchen. I still remember the effects of that song that had on me again with another girl, so all these little memories, I could connect with the songs, which drives my wife crazy. It still holds true to this day. And so when I'm with them, I'm like, oh my gosh, these are the guys that actually did this. But, you try to stay calm, you try to stay cool and be yourself.
How about you, Dennis? Tell us, because since knowing about you, I've known of you as both a Smithereen and a guy who's in the Beach Boys universe, but never was clear on how you initially got ingratiated into that, into that world.
Yeah, I'll just start real quick at the beginning. I first heard Surfin' Safari in '62. My first single was actually went to get shut down. I didn't realize that Surfin' USA was on the other side. Blew my mind when I caught that after I brought it out of the store, and just grew up loving every single was a new adventure, a new world. It blew my mind. First saw them in '71 on the Surf's Up tour, and saw every tour in the '70s, I think. They just inspired me on so many levels. And I think it was in '83 or '85, Todd Abramson and I produced a show at Folk City in New York City, where we had a core band celebrating Brian Wilson's music and a bunch of vocalists, Marshall Crenshaw, Cub Coda, guys from Yola Tango, I think. Anyway, we did the show, and it kind of stirred the soup a little bit, getting the whole renewed Brian consciousness moving. I had the opportunity to work on the American Band documentary. I compiled a chronology of their career that they used as a template for that documentary. It was the first of its kind for the band, where they actually dug deeper and did some cool interviews and incorporated old footage. Jeff, I was also at that Washington Monument concert in '84, and I was hanging out backstage. Anyway, so I started making inroads there. And what kind of really got me in a little more into Brian's world, now that I'm thinking about all this, I became friends with Andy Paley right around the time he was starting to work on Brian's first solo album. And, I would call Andy, and he would be in the studio with Brian. He'd put me on the phone with Brian, and he knew how passionate I was about Brian and the Beach Boys, as he is to this day. And I met Brian once before, and I said, I'd love to meet Brian and hang out. So he snuck me into Nassau Coliseum. In early '89, Brian was doing like a mini set in the middle of the Beach Boys show to promote the solo album. And so he snuck me in to meet Brian then. I think that's the first time I met Jeff Foskett, was at that show. And then fast forward to the late '90s or mid '90s, there's this fella called Rick Colville, who's a big Beach Boys fan in New Jersey. He did like a mini convention. I was brought in to play drums, and Foskett was the star of the show. And Jeff and I bonded that day. He was really into my playing, into my drumming. I was in the house band. We stayed in touch, and he brought me in for different projects. He got me to sit in with Brian. He brought me in to play a couple private shows in England with Billy Hinchy, who became a great friend, rest his soul, and David Marks, and some of the other people in the Beach Boys world. And John Cowsill, of course, when he was drumming with the Beach Boys, introduced me to Mike. And Mike and I kind of bonded too, and sat in with them a couple times, which was a great thrill. So it's just, I think, like all of us, just the extension of being a fan and wanting to be there and finding a way through the cosmos to get in there somehow.
I probably heard about you just as many times as being a Smithereen as I did that you were not just a massive Beach Boys fan, but that you were doing something involving the Beach Boys. It seemed like a 1-to-1 ratio.
Oh, that's cool. I guess the other way that my name got associated with the Beach Boys, I did have an opportunity to do some liner notes. Actually, when Sundays Records first released the Height Sessions on vinyl in 1991, I think it was, I was brought in to do liner notes for that. Then I did notes for the 15 Big Ones reissue and wrote some articles in various publications. So I guess that put my name out there too.
That's awesome. Yeah. So initially, I was pestering both you guys to, can you put me in touch with this person, put me in touch with that person, or help me spitball or brainstorm a list of people that we could have for Patreon. But then as things were going on, I think it just became clearer that we kind of have the same investment in this thing. And this just made sense. And I love our texting thread that we have going, because it's always so rife with good news. There's always so many awesome developments happening, and seemingly nobody doesn't want to be a part of this project. You know, the sort of real debut of this being more than just a kernel of an idea was last week when I drove out to Boston to meet up with Jeff and go backstage and, you know, meet the touring Beach Boys and meet Mike and get to talk with Mike Love about how this would go and get a commitment on his end. And that was what, like, not even 10 days ago. That was like, yeah, it was like a week ago.
Yeah.
Already there's been an interview, a couple of commitments, a few commitments. And this thing is moving quickly. It's moving in a locomotive fashion. You know, may it continue to sail strong through to completion. Do you guys want to talk about our wish list? If anyone's listening to the show and you're one of these people, feel free to reach out to us before we get to you, because the call is coming. So we haven't reached out yet to Blondie and Ricky, Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fattar, but you know, that's going to be coming. And, you know, we honestly don't know what's going to be going on with Brian, just because circumstantially and medically, it may not be possible for that to be happening. But, you know, with regard to the Behind the Mirror companion episodes, we're looking at getting in touch with John Stamos, Carney Wilson, Wendy Wilson, Marilyn Wilson, Diane Ravel, Ginger Blake, Kristen Love, Gary Griffin, David Beard, Dean Torrance, Dominic Priori, Darian Sahanaja, Probin Gregory, David Leaf, Stephen Gaines, Don Randy, Andy Paley, Tony Asher, Danny Hutton, Van Dyke Parks, Evan Landy, who's Eugene Landy's son, Stephen Kalinich, Brian Eichenberger, who's the musical director of the band and the singer of the current touring version of the Beach Boys, John Bolton, the drummer and also singer, Fred Vale, John Cowsill, Nick Grillo, Carol Wilson, Dennis's first wife, Matt Jardine, Ed Carter, Bobby Figueroa, Mike Kowalski, Chris Montez, Andrew Doe, Carol Kay, Stephen Desper, Tony Tennille, Jerry Weiss, Ray Lawler, Carly Munoz, Mike Melvoin, Wyatt Funderburk, who does the Sail On Beach Boys podcast, Don Was, Alan Boyd, Mark Linnett, Mark London, John Stebbins, Henry Gross, Rob Bonfiglio, and Paul Mertens. It's quite a list.
That is quite a list.
Sure is.
So, you know, even if we get some people saying no, we'll still have plenty of people. And I can't see many no's happening. And by the way, I'm curious. I'm sitting here and I don't have any knowledge of how the two of you guys met. Jeff, how did the two of you guys cross paths initially?
So I believe it was the early 2000s. Brian was playing at BB King's in New York City. And Dennis happened to be, you know, a guest of Jeffrey's. And backstage, you know, it's not a very big backstage area. So Dennis was back there, and then I could hear the mumblings from like Nicky Wonder and Derry. Oh, that's Dennis Diken of the Smithereens. So then they asked to take some pictures, and I took some pictures. Next thing you know, I got I believe it was an email first, and then maybe a phone call from Dennis saying, hey, by the way, you know, you photographed me with Brian. Jeffrey gave me your info. Can you, you know, send me the pictures? And I did. And then I think that, you know, every time that Brian was either in New York City or whatever, Dennis was always, you know, at one of the shows. And then when Jeffrey went out and was doing one of his personal gigs in Annapolis at the Ram's Head, you know, Dennis was there also sitting in on drums with Jeffrey's band. So it was a good time, you know, and Dennis is a great guy. So it's good to be a part of all of this with people who appreciate the music.
I remember both those nights, Jeff, for sure. And I still treasure that picture you took of me with Brian and Mr. Fosquet. I believe it was Lou Christie that was hanging out backstage.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Lou Christie.
Because he broke out into the Lightning Strike song.
So in sort of wrapping up, I just want to say that, you know, already we have 3 hours of stuff. I have the David Marks interview. We haven't yet scheduled Al Jardine or Mike Love, but that's coming. And then, of course, you know, getting the other guys. And then it's going to be just like an unending volley. And at some point, I'm going to kind of turn my focus away from looking for guests for the show who are not Beach Boys related for quite some time. So this is going to be, kind of a roll of the dice here because my show is not just about the Beach Boys, it's about music. But these guys mean so much to me, as they do for so many people. It's just one of those bands where it overwhelms you, the intensity of your love for them. And, so much so that before anyone had been approached, I actually outlined the first 5 episodes, all my notes and my questions. I just was proceeding as if it was happening, in my spare time, of which there's precious little. I was outlining episodes for the Beach Boys series. And so now that we're here, I will say that, I love doing this with you guys. It's such an absolute pleasure. In the course of the show, Joe Kennedy, the guy that I started it with, he's the only other guy I worked with, like on actual episodes. I've worked with people behind the scenes, but you guys have such a great, cheerful, laid back disposition. Unless you're hiding something and you're psychotic bastards when you hang up the phone, you're really, really pleasant people. And it's just, wonderful to have 2 people who are just such awesome people to be doing this with. Life is fucking hard enough, when you're working with people who are just terrible, but you have to work with them. It's just been a blessing so far.
Thanks for saying that, Dave. And it's actually, when you did the introduction and you did the whole spray can thing, I had to pinch myself because I'm such a fan of Discograffiti, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, I'm on Discograffiti now. It's kind of a big deal for me, really. I'm such a fan, and I know this is going to go in great places that have not been visited before. It's going to illuminate what the Beach Boys are to a lot of casual listeners who don't really get, I think, what the expanse of their universe is. And some folks just might dismiss them as lightweights and have no clue as to where this is all coming from and the true sophistication of this art, And so, and I'm really delighted to be reunited with Jeff. We've been out of touch for a while. As the kids used to say, all good.
Yeah, they still say it. I don't know if it is all good, but it's all useful. And this is definitely going to be all useful. And just like the Beach Boys have done, we hope to create a work of intense, shimmering beauty that will allow people to, like you said, understand what the Beach Boys did and, the portent behind their music. But also what I'm most interested in is not necessarily their feelings about the music, but they've been on a very intense emotional ride. And a lot of that stuff has been left on the floors of courtrooms and, bedrooms that we'll never see. It's kind of behind closed doors. I want to get a lot of that stuff, because I don't know how many more opportunities we're going to get or they're going to get to revisit this stuff. And I want to make sure that, everyone's cognizant of that going in. So there's no mistaken ideas about what this is. This is kind of, I'm looking at it as a final opportunity for everyone. And it's one that can't be frittered away or wasted. All right, that about does it. If you enjoy this episode, then Venmo Gebroe. I repeat, Venmo Gebroe. Or use PayPal, and you can find me there at davidbgebroe@gmail.com. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 5-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe. Stay tuned, because next week, we've got the story of Jesus 2, the absolutely true and harrowing tale of the collapsed 1994 feature film I attempted and failed to complete right out of college at a cost of $100,000. Get ready for a boatload of essential Dave Gebroe background info, because essentially, this is my rosebud. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. Then come Monday, Joe Kennedy's back for another sassy episode of Discograffiti's Top 10. And this time out, it's the top 10 most annoying goddamn songs of all time. All you opinionated son of a guns better be sure not to miss this one. That'll be available on the major tier. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier is going to get a discography dissection of one-of-a-kind psychedelic Japanese mystery man, Harumi. And then come Friday, it's the story of Jesus 2. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Jeff McEvoy, Dennis Diken, David Marks, Mike Love, Jacqueline Love, Al and Marianne Jardine, the current touring iteration of the Beach Boys, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that'll put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. In fact, I know firsthand about some very exciting projects coming together because of fellow soldiers who collided in our incredible group. Honestly, it is objectively the only worthwhile thing that's come from Zuckerberg's college efforts. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, September 6th, we're coming at you with the story of Jesus 2. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!